Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the first day of the DCC-CR talk program at Ecomondo. I am Federica Orsi, Senior Communicator Officer of the DCC. I am pleased to guide you through today's program. This afternoon, we have the pleasure to start with the greetings of our director, Professor Nadia Pinardi. After that, we will proceed with a keynote delivered by Eugenia Baroncelli. So please, welcome, Nadia.
Thank you, Federica. Good afternoon, everybody. So this is an event organized by the UNDK, the Collaborative Center for Coastal Resilience. Next, please. Let me see. So, just to be, the Decade Collaborative Center is a department center of the University of Bologna, supported by the Emilia-Romagna region, and it's a directorate for knowledge, economy, and business. The main mission of the DCC is to strengthen the connection between the new science developed during the decade, along the decade, with coastal stakeholders. Next, please. So, as we were saying also in the other session, we are part of an ecosystem of centers that have been established during the first year of the decade to help the coordination of the new science. So we have the DCOs, the Decade Coordination Offices, that are all UN offices, so they are already infrastructures present, but they have a new mandate, so they are Decade Collaborative offices now. And then you have new centers that are financed by member states that are called Decade Collaborative Centers, DCC. Ours is this, and they are thematic. And then there are regional centers on some, particularly important areas of the world. So the last one to come is Sustainable Blue Economy that has been established in April and will start early next year. We have Ocean Vision that is for climate solutions and is in US, in Atlanta and Woods Hole. Ocean Climate Nexus is Qingdao in China and is mainly revising the knowledge between ocean and climate. And then we have Ocean Prediction Center that is in Toulouse, Mercator Ocean. Okay, the next one, and so Coastal Resilience Hour. This is our network of coastal resilient centers, stakeholders. So we have 130 pilot sites that we organized to come together to tell us what is the coastal resilience they want. So we want, in this context, to interface with the new science that is developed by the UN Decade and build a new global coast, what we call the Global Coast Network. Next one is finished. It's finished. Yeah, so this is our most important activity that started with this program, which is also University of Bologna program, UN Decade program, Goose program. And the Decade Collaborative Center helps to get the network to test solutions for coastal resilience. So, finished. This is the introduction of the center. And I now leave the floor finally to our first keynote speaker.
Yeah, it's time for the first keynote speech delivered by Professor Eugenia Baroncelli on the politics of coastal resilience, ocean coastal governance in the age of sustainability, adaptation and beyond, followed by a 10 Q&A session. Let me introduce the professor. Baroncelli. Eugenia Baroncelli is an associate professor of political science at the University of Bologna and a former consultant on trade tariff and IPR policies at the World Bank. Among other topics, Eugenia's research currently explores the evaluation of complex approach to development support in the new global context, with a focus on cross-policy and inter-organizational dynamics under the aegis of UN-orchestrated triple nexus endeavor. A founding member of the Global Governance Research Group in the Una Europa Consortium since 2023, she has served as a program committee member of the UNESCO-sponsored Development Collaborative Center of Coastal Resilience. Thank you very much. Eugenia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks very much to Professor Pinardi for having me over today. And thank you for being here. I have the privilege to share with you just some thoughts about the politics of coastal resilience, ocean coastal governance in the age of sustainability, adaptation, and beyond. Let me briefly go through what I hope to be able to share with you today. Is there a need for coastal politics to start with? Where does politics fit? Do we need the coast to be a political actor? Yes, no, why? My answer, and I anticipate this to you, is yes, we do. We totally do. There are many challenges, costly challenges, that cannot be met without enough energy and agency by the coast. So my first question is, who governs the coast? Who's in charge of deciding, planning, adapting, transforming the coast to meet these future challenges? Most of the debate has currently revolved around the idea of resilience in the context of sustainability. My point is sustainability enough? And is the idea of resilience as it is currently received enough? And the answer is perhaps for the moment, not for the future. The idea is that resilience should be enhanced in a way that is also transformative, as I will try to share with you. So I will conclude with a few ideas about coastal politics and the future, and the potential that we have to question the very idea of resilience towards more transformative adaptation strategies. I've heard this morning a number of excellent ideas about adaptation. My final point is that adaptation needs to be transformative if we want it to be effective but also inclusive. So let me start by talking about politics. What does politics have to do with environmental resilience and coastal resilience to start with? What is politics? Well, politics is both a collective endeavor to achieve collectively good outcomes, but politics is also the locus of power dynamics. Politics is also a struggle for power. And we are struggling to be heard right now. So let me tell you, this is something that, it's somewhere in between. It's not just a struggle for power. It is not just striving to achieve a superior, publicly shared set of goods. It's somewhere in between. But we need to deal with that. We need to deal with power. We need to deal with bargains if we want to have good policies for the coast. Let me also share with you that one thing is to talk about domestic politics, what happens inside states, which normally takes place under the hierarchy of a government, a judiciary, legislative bodies, and what happens outside in the realm of international politics. Okay, now we have to struggle also with the Forum of the Blue Economy, but we will make it. So what happens at the global level is relevant for the coast. Coastal challenges are a global issue, and we also need global efforts to meet those challenges. We need to be aware that at the international level, there is no global judge, there is no global policeman, there is no global decision maker. So how do we reconcile these two levels and design policies for the coast that are effective and inclusive at the same time? Well, let me tell you, a number of contributions have started exploring the governance of coastal resilience, and I have explored how to make the governance adaptive to coastal challenges. We need to deal with the idea that governance is different from government. They have many things in common, particularly the fact that they strive to achieve collectively good goals, but government, in addition to being the governmental bodies inside states, takes place normally under formal authority and police powers that induce compliance by players who do not want to abide by shared objectives. Governance, on the other side, cannot afford the luxury of a policing authority that forces states, institutions to comply. So we are dealing with something that has some elements of governments, but is devoid of policing powers. We need to keep this in mind when we think about policies for the coast. So, is there a need for coastal politics at all, given these many problems? It seems that politics provides more problems than solutions. And my answer is yes. Much of the world's population, economic activities, and cultural World Heritage sites are concentrated near the sea, which means we need to come to terms with the coast as the locus of a number of activities, opportunities, and challenges. That's a valid reason for me just to start. But let me deal very briefly with some of the coastal challenges that you know much better than I do. Coasts are inhabited in between by 37 to 40% of the world population, according to UNEP data 2024, considering all land within 100 kilometers. And these numbers are projected to grow, particularly in Asia and Europe. If you see the percent increase in inhabitants in coastal region less or equal to 50 kilometers from the coast is 9% in the period between 2000 and 2018 in Europe. So in Europe, those who lived in the inland have remained stable. Those who lived on the coast have increased by 9 percentage points, and they are likely to grow. And this is not over, there's something else. The densest areas will be the ones most affected by sea level rise. So more people living along the coast and in dire needs across time. And this is taken from one of the chapters of the first report on the Knowledge Hub on sea level rise that will be launched here on the 7th.
On the 8th.
On the 8th, on Friday, on the concluding day, under the aegis of Professor Nadia Pinardi and a number of other experts, the CMCC.
Well, it's JPI Oceans and JPI Climate joint initiative.
So it's a massive effort to survey sea level rise data and challenges across Europe. These are NASA data, so worldwide. In the period between 1993 and 2024, the sea has risen more than 10.33 centimeters. So the problem here is there's a challenge. The challenge is mostly coming from human activities and will affect a growing number of people living near the coast. Key challenges such as flooding, compound flooding, erosion, saltwater intrusion are likely to worsen. In Europe, the situation is projected to worsen. As we said, Asia and Europe will be the most affected regions by the end of the 21st century. There are estimates, the most pessimistic ones, that aim at 80% projected to rise in the northern sea in Europe. Coastal erosion also a major problem. The average estimated shoreline shrinkage between 0.5, which is half a meter, and 2 meters per year, according to UNEP estimates. So the point is, we do need an effort to manage these challenges. And so I get back to my early question, who governs the coast? Why are there no institutions? Why are there no institutions that are consensually, univocally designated to govern the coast? This is not to say that there are no institutions, but they are scattered at different governance levels, and they deal with different problems. They deal with health, they deal with oceans, they deal with land issues, but they don't deal with the coast per se. That's my point. So the question is, who is interested in the coast? Who decides about the coast? And to what aims? At which governance level? Is it municipalities, the region, state level, supranational, EU, or regional above national within the EU, or international, intergovernmental? Well, just the fact that we are here under the aegis of a collaborative effort that is under the aegis of IOC, UNESCO, the DCC-CR, a number of public, private, governmental, stakeholder-led institutions tells us that there is a number of energies and interests that revolve around the coast. Yet, there is no such thing as an SDG for the coast. There is SDG number 13, climate action, number 14, life below water, number 15, life on land, but there is no mention explicit in the SDGs. There is a mention in the targets, So, yet, in the latest meeting of the UN in September, and the Pact for the Future, the follow-up that the heads of states have drafted pursuant to our common agenda 2021, our common agenda framework set by Secretary General Guterres, there's one mention about sea level rise. One mention about sea level rise. Many mention of resilience, but only on one occasion related to oceans and coasts. Most of the other times, resilience is quoted about humanitarian issues, peace-related issues, economic issues. So it's one among the many. And why is that the case? Well, because the coast is not politically salient. The coast doesn't have political agency. The coast per se doesn't decide. Who decides? That's my point. Who decides about the coast? Well, we need to connect many governance levels in order to make, to draw maybe a sketch, because it changes across different national contexts. There is an international level, mostly intergovernmental. There is the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas. We saw the UN 2030 agenda, the 3 objectives. There is a number of EU major efforts. The EU Floods Directive 2007, the EU Maritime Spatial Planning Directive 2014, the EU Green Deal, even if there is no mention of coastal challenges in the EU Green Deal per se, the EU Adaptation Strategy to Climate Change 2021, and enter the national legislations. A plethora of different approaches. Just limiting our overview to Europe. There are some best performers, for example, in the area of sea level rise, and I'm indebted to Dr. Giulia Galluccio and Dr. Alexander Bizarro about these elements. They are drawn from Chapter 7 in the first sea level rise report. Ireland, the Netherlands, Estonia, and Spain are best performers in Europe with respect to not only acknowledging sea level rise as a chronic hazard, but also by incorporating measures to adapt to sea level rise in their legislation. So not only monitoring, but also adopting legislation and implementing it. Runner-ups, Germany and Belgium, very, very strong runner-ups. Italy, where is Italy? Well, Italy, unfortunately, in comparative terms, lags a bit behind. However, in spite of the fact that Italy still has to define exactly where to allocate authorities and competencies between the state and the regions who still have the authority on territory management, Italy has been able to set up an interim approach with a cooperation between Stato and Regioni to provide for action in service of the coastal resilience. So, in the current narrative, coastal resilience politics has been mostly framed either as a major obstacle, politics gets in the way, politics doesn't allow appropriate action to be taken for the coast, or at best, as an enabler, they let us implement the policies, not as a provider of solutions. And that, in my view, should be changed. There have been attempts, many attempts, especially in Europe, of past coastal politics that has provide fruits. For example, think about the case of the UK, particularly England, the building of infrastructures for the coast, 1/4 of the coast defended by now. Such barriers, Mose in Italy, and many, many more in the UK, the majority one in Belgium and 6 in the Dutch Delta, and efforts to provide beach nourishment efforts. However, working for the coast, providing for the coast, making the coast resilient costs. The coast costs. It costs a lot. Who pays for the coast? Okay, who pays for the coast? Who pays for the coast to be resilient, and what does it mean to have a resilient coast? According to most studies, resilience is the system's ability to continue functioning in spite of disturbances. The problem here, we have to reconcile the needs of natural systems. First and foremost, the disturbance comes from the many challenges we've seen, but we don't conceive of disturbances from the socio-economic system that in itself has its own cycles, its own dynamics. So the disturbances, increased storm, beach erosion, they are the primary stressors, but there are other stressors that we do not take into account, and we need to take into account if we want to have an effective coastal politics. Socio-economic systems also need to be resilient, and they need to be studied and understood in themselves if we want to make them receptive and adaptive. So funding coastal resilience is estimated around $4 trillion. That was a 2019 estimate by Nichols. Jochen and others in 2014 estimated that $70 billion will be needed per year by the next century, both provided by Bizzarro and Galluccio's analysis. There's no way we are going to meet these needs if we don't work to strengthen partnerships. And the partnerships have to be built between both private and public authorities, so public-private partnerships. But we cannot leave it entirely to the private sector. We need to have a political guidance about these efforts. We need, for example, to forge partnerships. The European Union has gone about that through the EIB, but that's not going to be enough, and that's just for Europe. So we need additional sources of funding, and we need advocacy in order to be able to find potential sources of financing. So we need current and future alliances if we want to meet the SDGs and Agenda 2030 beyond. Where should we put the governance for the coast? What is the most appropriate governance level then? Who funds the coast? I don't have an answer. I don't have an answer. I know that we can't do without a bottom-up approach. So the problem needs to be dealt as close as possible to its source. I would say this as an economist, but as a scholar of political science, I'm telling you, we can't do without a top-down guidance. We need a mixture in a way that is not dissimilar to what happened, for example, in the environmental regime for the reduction of GHG emissions. So we need to have nationally determined contributions, but at the same time, we need to have a global oversight about these efforts in order to provide impetus and to conclude and then open the floor for discussion. We'd probably best forget this idea of resilience as resistance, resilience as being able to stand. No, we need to adapt, but we need to do more than just adapting. We need to make sure that the opportunities provided by the challenges lead us to adaptation in a way that is also transformative, adapting in a way that we are able to bounce back better, in a way that puts us in a position to respond to current and future challenges, which means environmentally sustainable, yes, tick. Financially sustainable, yes, another tick. Politically acceptable, and that's no easy task. Not the best, but good enough, which means we need to decide what is the appropriate level of governance. We may not have just one answer. It may be it's going to be flexible, but finally, we also need to have a recipe for the coast that is socially progressive, inclusive, and just. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much, Eugenia, for the enriching talk you had. It was very, very inspiring. Are there any questions from the stage here?
We need to do a quick run through because
okay.
answers to go right.
So we can go through the roundtable. It is my privilege to now introduce the participants to our roundtable. The title of the roundtable is Transformative Alliances, Research and Policymaker Action. We are sincerely grateful for the presence and the time you are dedicating to us. Let me introduce Hans-Martin Fuessel. Dr. Fuessel holds a PhD from the Potsdam Institute of Climate Impact, Research Sustainable Solution. He is a project manager at European Environment Agency, where he ensures that European and national policymakers have access to vital information on climate change in Europe. He is actively involved in the EUCRA project, which aims to establish a European baseline for climate risk to support national assessment. We have online we have Dr. Willem Jan Goosen. Is a policy officer for resilience and adaptation to climate change at the European Commission Directorate General for Climate Action. With extensive experience in policy development and multi-level governance, he has led complex multidisciplinary programs across regional, national, and international levels. His expertise spans climate adaptation, water management, biodiversity, disaster risk reduction, and environmental management, with a specialization in European and national water management and climate resilience initiatives. Welcome, Dr. Goosen. We have Dr. Marcello Rosetti from Confindustria. Is a general advisor and past president of Confindustria Cisambiente, as well as general director of Consorzio CFA. He brings extensive experience in environmental and industrial policies within the Confindustria network. So please, Dr. Rosetti. We also have Simone Quatrini, is a consultant with a PhD with EU Blue and ATH Zurich, and is a member of the Blue Economy Observatory. His expertise spans from environmental and development economics, building finance, and geoinformatics. And also online, we have Elisa Fiorini Beckhauser. She's a PhD candidate in law and sustainability at the University of Salento, researching climate vulnerabilities and human rights in Latin America. Yes, of course, Professor Baroncelli, please. So, we would like to have a question for all of you. And the first question is there an alignment of the EU Green Deal targets with coastal resilience sustainable development targets? If so, could you provide, please, some examples? And if not, could you explain why? Dr. Fuessel, may I kindly ask you to start? All of you have 3 minutes. Thank you very much.
Good. Thank you very much for the kind invitation. If I look a little bit nervous, it's because I still have a pretty long travel schedule ahead on a day with a national train strike. So if I look at my phone once in a while, it's not a disregard of this panel, but just adapting and trying to create some travel resilience. Now, the EU Green Deal is a collection of policy initiatives, which was, of course, spearheaded by the first von der Leyen Commission 4 or 5 years ago, and it's still the basis also for the incoming Commission that we'll probably have in a couple of weeks. A flagship initiative. It doesn't include many explicit goals and targets. I mean, maybe the key target is indeed climate neutrality by 2050, with a number of other targets. Also, a new EU adaptation strategy was announced and adopted a few years ago. But yeah, as already mentioned by the previous speaker, the Green Deal does not include specific targets aimed at coastal regions. However, these regions are hotspots for many economic and social activities addressed in the Green Deal, such as clean energy production, reducing land-based, marine-based pollution, sustainable mobility, and indeed the first European climate risk assessment that the EA was conducting with a number of partners finds that low-lying coastal regions are also hotspots for several major climate risks, and this climate risk assessment is a child of the Green Deal. And as also explained before, the Sustainable Development Goals don't have, I mean, some of them, 13, 14, 15, are related to it, but they don't mention it either. So I think rather than looking at the synergies, it's in how do we deal with trade-offs between the goals and targets when the same area might face different users, choice of different users, and how do they rank in a multi-criteria analysis.
My turn. Well, thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank the organizers for inviting me. I'm Simone Quatrini. I work for the European Commission Joint Research Center. And we produce, as was one of our main outputs, an annual report on the state of the EU blue economy. So we are covering all economic sectors that are linked to the oceans and the seas and the coasts. And of course, we are trying more and more over the years to cover also this dimension of sustainability, which has more recently, thanks to the EU Nature Restoration Law, included a number of concrete actions that member states have to undertake in order to restore damaged ecosystems, both on land and on sea. So these targets are 20% of these ecosystems need to be restored by 2030. So the clock is ticking, and therefore concrete actions need to be undertaken in the very short term by each member state to designate in the first place those areas that need restoration, and then decide, hopefully in consultation with the scientific community, what to do and which technologies, which solutions, nature-based solutions, for example, to employ to be effective in this restoration effort. If you wish, I would like to add to what my colleague from EEA has just said, a simple statement that there is a strong overlap between the, let's say, targets of the European Green Deal and the targets of the Sustainable Development Goals insofar as coastal resilience is concerned. I agree that some of those overlaps are not directly, explicitly mentioned as such, but they are, let's say, embedded within some of the actions that have been taken. And just to give a few examples, since the question was asking a few concrete examples, I'd like to refer first and foremost to the climate change mitigation and adaptation efforts. Europe has set for itself the ambitious target to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 55% by 2030 compared to 1990 levels, which of course aligns pretty much with the SDG target 14.3, which aims to minimize and address the impacts of ocean acidification. Another example is marine protected areas, MPAs. With the biodiversity strategy, the target is to have at least 30% of EU seas designated as marine protected areas by 2030. And there has been considerable progress already in some countries more than others over the past few years. Germany, for example, and some other countries are featuring quite high in terms of percentage. Some other European member states are catching up. But this also aligns quite nicely, again, with the Sustainable Development Target SDG 14.5, which again aims to conserve at least 10% of coastal and marine areas. Now, behind all that, there is, of course, a large financial effort. It has been estimated that the Invest EU needs to mobilize 1 trillion euros by 2030 to achieve all that. And we heard this morning from our colleague from the European Investment Bank that 1/3 of this envelope has already been mobilized by the European Investment Bank, not only directly, but also with the additional investments that they can leverage. Just to conclude, maybe since I work for the Blue Economy Observatory, in terms of sustainable blue economy, there is also a quite strong overlap between the European Green Deal and the Sustainable Development Goals. Both aim towards that long-term objectives. And we, as the European Commission, are promoting activities across all economic sectors to achieve that objective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Goosen, it's your turn, please, from online.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for inviting me. Now, I don't have to add too much to what is already said. I think indeed that the EU Green Deal, with all the strategies and all the laws which have been adopted since then, are very much aligned with the strategic sustainable development goals generally. And also if you focus, of course, on oceans and seas and on the land and on the coastal area, which of course is exactly in the middle. It's not a surprise because much of the EU policy is also developed with a close eye on the sustainable development goals. So I think I can be rather short that I think they are aligned. And of course, it's very much on the implementation where the big challenges are. The nature restoration regulation was already mentioned. I think that one is a very important one for coastal areas, but also the EU adaptation strategy and the EU climate law, which also stipulates what member states need to do, but also the Just Transition Fund, Social Climate Fund. So it's not only about the dealing with climate impacts, but it's also very much focused on the social and the just transition elements. And maybe the last remark is that transitions is very much recognized as being a key challenge for the Green Deal. So that's also on board. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Dr. Fiorini Beckhauser, please, it's your turn. Elisa, can you hear us? Oh. Okay, we have some technical issues. I will come back.
Okay,
Okay,
I guess
perfect.
that now you can hear me, right? Because I wasn't able to unmute myself.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you very much for your invitation. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend in person due to the train strikes, but still I'm glad to exchange some ideas with you. So about your question, I consider that, as previous colleagues have already said, that the targets of the European Green Deal and the coastal resilience, sustainable development, they have a high level of interlocution. We can think about biodiversity and ecosystem health, because the European Green Deal puts the protection of restoration of biodiversity and ecosystems as a priority, also highlighting that European seas and coastal environments are keen to sustain life now and in the future. And it also follows a biodiversity strategy that is related to the restoration of degraded marine ecosystems that is essential to preserve their natural functions. And at the same time, we can think about the SDG 14 on the sustainable use of oceans and marine resources, with a specific target directed at the protection of coastal ecosystems, strengthening their resilience and avoiding adverse impacts. But I think that we can also look at the climate adaptation together with community engagement, also for the just transition, since both frameworks recognize the importance of engaging communities in climate resilience planning. So the European Green Deal promotes building more resilient infrastructure and also creating strategies, for example, for water management, that are crucial for coastal areas that are vulnerable to the rising of sea levels, for example, and at the same time mentions the need to empower the regional and the local communities in the context of these just transitions. And this reasoning is also aligned with the SDG 13 when it mentions mechanisms for raising capacity for effective climate change related management, especially considering the input of local and marginalized communities, which could help reduce the vulnerability in the coasts. So I guess that's it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your contribution. Professor Baroncelli, please.
Thank you. I would say definitely that aligning with the SDGs is good, but we need to think beyond national levels. We need to think not only about Europe, we need to think about the coasts in the world. And so my question is, are we fit to finance coastal needs for the next 50 years? Also in areas that do not have the sophistication of institutions, financing methods that we have in Europe. I don't know. I don't want to be too negative, but let me shift it back to you.
That's a very good point. Thank you very much. So please, Dr. Rosetti.
Buongiorno. Io intanto mi scuso perché intervengo in italiano perché il mio inglese è pessimo.
Okay, apologizing for speaking in Italian.
Bene, intanto grazie dell'invito perché il tema di coinvolgere i vari stakeholder è fondamentale, anche perché non c'è, ai problemi complessi le risposte semplici non esistono.
Okay, thank you for being here, and this is a complex problem, and there are no easy answers to such complex program.
E solo con la collaborazione attiva di tutti i soggetti coinvolti è possibile pensare di arrivare ad avere un'azione efficace.
And only with the involvement of all the involved stakeholders we can achieve a possible solution.
Se la domanda è rispetto al Green Deal europeo, alle strategie, alla coerenza rispetto al tema che affrontiamo oggi, la mia risposta è sì. Se la domanda è invece sull'efficacia di quanto è stato fatto, avrei molti più dubbi a rispondere.
Okay, if the answer is about the connection of a EU Green Deal and the Sustainable Development Targets, about what has been done till today, then yes, something has been done. If the question is related to the future, is it enough for the future? Then no, not necessarily.
Anche perché parlare di coste non è separabile dal mio punto di vista dal parlare dei nostri fiumi e quindi parlare delle città, perché anche dal grafico che abbiamo visto prima sulla concentrazione della popolazione, in realtà se andiamo ad allargarla alle città che nascono sui fiumi e quindi che poi portano sui mari e sulle coste i loro rifiuti e quant'altro, arriviamo praticamente alla totalità della popolazione.
Also talking about coasts means also talking about rivers and inland territories. So if we want to have an open vision, then it involves a larger area.
Quindi nessuno può chiamarsi fuori dalla tutela delle nostre coste, delle nostre città e dei nostri sistemi produttivi.
And nobody can say is not interested on the safeguard of our territories, our cities.
Io nello specifico il mio lavoro, l'azienda per cui lavoro, raccogliamo rifiuti, in particolar modo in Romagna dalla provincia di fatto di Ravenna, quindi ai confini con la provincia di Ferrara, fino a Rimini, compreso Forlì Cesena, facciamo anche la pulizia delle spiagge.
Okay, he with his job, his main area of interest is waste, and they collect waste in the Emilia-Romagna region from Ravenna to Ferrara and Rimini. And they collect waste from the ocean, right?
Yeah. E oltre che in altre zone d'Italia.
Beside other area in Italy.
E se volete potrei raccontarvi cosa troviamo sulle spiagge, cosa raccogliamo sulle spiagge, quando si stima che nel Mediterraneo finiscono 230.000 tonnellate di rifiuti plastici, e senza contare tutti gli altri rifiuti, e senza contare gli eventi straordinari.
Okay, we can tell you what we can find in our beaches. There are 230 tons of waste in the Mediterranean, and considering all the regions. 230 tonnellate.
230.000 tonnellate nel Mediterraneo.
230,000
Solo di
tonnellate
plastica.
on plastics only in Mediterranean.
E dicevo, noi abbiamo avuto l'evento alluvionale, che in realtà non è solo quello dello scorso anno, perché negli ultimi 18 mesi di fatto ce ne sono stati 3, almeno 3-4.
And I forgot to say before that these are without taking into account the extreme events like floodings. In the last 18 months, there have been 3 main floodings.
E quello che è arrivato sulle spiagge è una cosa indescrivibile. Le spiagge erano devastate, le nostre coste erano piene di qualunque tipo di rifiuto.
Our beaches were devastated, full of whatever type of waste.
E quindi idrocarburi rovesciati, perché le nostre città non sono attrezzate, non sono preparate a gestire questo tipo di eventi, non sono state pensate per gestire questi eventi.
Our cities have not been planned to manage this type of huge events.
E questo anche non è risolvibile solo parlando di coste, è risolvibile parlando di un sistema territoriale integrato che non è separabile.
And we cannot deal with this problem just talking about costs, but we need to talk about an integrated system.
E da questo punto di vista le strategie europee sono sicuramente in linea su alcuni obiettivi, anche su alcuni obiettivi non così noti, e faccio un esempio, poi chiudo perché sennò...
No, ma interessante. Okay, so he's going to give us an example to show us how the European is aligned with this problem.
Arriva dall'Europa di fatto l'obbligo per le aziende di dimensioni medio-grandi di adottare il report di sostenibilità.
Okay, Europe is enforcing a report of sustainability by big, small and medium-sized firms.
E questo obbligo che sta passando un po' in sordina,
This duty is like a compulsory responsibility that is not being advertised as much.
se ne sta parlando solo perché le banche nel rilasciare i finanziamenti chiedono delle dichiarazioni legate a questo punto, quindi per le aziende in questo momento è una noia e un problema da affrontare.
So the only reason why we are talking about this is because banks, to provide finances, require firms to have these reports, sustainability reports.
E è stato introdotto anche l'obbligo per le società che sono soggette del revisore di sostenibilità, oltre al classico collegio dei revisori, che è obbligatorio per le società di alcune dimensioni, dovranno introdurre anche il revisore ambientale.
Europe introduced what is called the revision, a sustainable revision, that has a figure. That is a figure that needs to analyze the balance sheets for the sustainability reports, basically.
Se riusciamo a far diventare per le aziende un'opportunità il report di sostenibilità e non un problema per il quale pago un consulente per scrivermi un documento che la banca mi accetti,
if we succeed in making it the report of sustainability, the duty of the report of sustainability is an opportunity and not just as a cost for the firm,
a quel punto potremmo vedere un salto di qualità della cultura delle aziende, perché io ho finito in questo momento l'esperienza nella mia azienda.
Then if it becomes an opportunity, then we can see a real jump in the activity of the private firms towards sustainability.
Per fare il primo report di sostenibilità ci abbiamo impiegato 2 anni.
In the company works for, to do the first report of sustainability, it took them 2 years.
E abbiamo scoperto delle cose, tra virgolette, incredibili.
And discover incredible things.
Che facevamo in realtà tante cose. c'erano tante attività che andavano, tante scelte che in qualche modo erano funzionali a questo obiettivo.
Yes, and so they discovered that they were doing much more activity than they thought of.
Ma erano fuori da un progetto d'insieme, erano fuori da una strategia, erano fuori da degli obiettivi e quindi non erano neanche rendicontabili.
So they were doing many more things that they were thinking were actually doing, and they were outside a common strategy, a common objective of the firm.
E quindi parlavano solo a noi, erano al di fuori anche di una strategia più generale perché non essendo rendicontabili non erano possibile condividerli nelle strategie generali e a quel punto erano più deboli.
So they were different, not part of an overall plan, and so difficult to account for.
Quindi è per quello che dicevo, c'è un tema di cultura che le nostre imprese, come tutto in realtà il nostro sistema territoriale, deve recepire su come ognuno deve fare la sua parte.
There is a problem of culture on how each of us needs to do its own part towards sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this contribution. So let's skip to the second question. What is the desirable framework to be used in Europe to access the long-term sustainability of coastal resilience? Dr. Fuessel, please.
Yeah, thank you. DA does not assess the sustainability of European national regional policies as such. However, our reports, and including the first European Climate Risk Assessment, but also other products such as the European Climate Adaptation Platform, Climate Adapt, they highlight a number of points which I believe are relevant here. I mean, it's central to consider that coastal regions have multiple uses, and those uses might be related to different objectives. Anything from ecological biodiversity, economic uses, human settlements, essentially infrastructure. So this multi-use aspect is a central aspect of the coasts. And the integration of those policy areas, sectors, levels of administration is generally known as integrated coastal zone management. I think it has been mentioned before. So this integrated coastal zone management cannot avoid trade-offs between different policy goals, but it makes them explicit early enough in the process to allow for informed decision-making early. Also, coastal resilience policies, in particular in low-lying coastal regions, require a long-term perspective, a dynamic approach to account for the significant changes ahead resulting from human-made climate change alone, not to mention, of course, other factors. And many of those changes can no longer be avoided. If I add a few points specifically from the European Climate Risk Assessments, I would pose the following questions to any such frameworks. Does the policy or plan consider a range of plausible scenarios for sea level rise and extreme water levels into the future? How is a coastal zone affected by the inland activities mentioned before, such as nutrient runoff, river floods? How is it affected by marine activities, energy infrastructure, fishing? And on the other way around, which important service does a coastal region provide beyond its boundaries? It's not sufficient to look at the coast as an isolated area, as it's actually the interface between different activities. Which functions and services shall be prioritized in the case of trade-offs between various policy goals, and which actors and governance framework need to work together to achieve the stated policy objectives?
Thank you very much for your contribution. So Dr. Fuessel has to catch a train. So thank you very much for the contribution. If you have to leave, thank you very much for your contribution. If you have the opportunity to stay, you are always welcome with us. Let's proceed with the other answers. So please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to address this question by asking ourselves first, what are the issues that we're trying to address? From what we heard so far, including the session this morning and also the excellent presentation by Professor Baroncelli earlier, it seems to me that we are dealing with three main issues in terms of governance. One is an issue of fragmentation. Fragmentation, both institutional, administrative, multiple levels, multiple policies, trade-offs, and so on. A second level or second order of issues is fitness for purpose in terms of action. And the third one, what we heard from Dr. Rosetti, is a question of effectiveness. So from my humble standpoint, I would like to suggest the following, that in terms of addressing fragmentation, and without, let's say, so while giving my support to the words that were mentioned by Professor Baroncelli earlier, I would like to advocate for an integrated approach, both in terms of levels, national, international, regional, also at the level of involvement, inclusiveness, participation, bottom-up, stakeholder-driven approaches, so that the voices are heard, including the voices of those who live in the coastal areas and depend on economic activities in the coastal areas. And I would say, last but not least, also integration from the point of view of tools that are used to address these different issues. And this brings me to the second point, fitness for purpose. So here, coming from the JRC, I cannot avoid saying that there is plenty of knowledge and experience and expertise out there that should be harnessed to the maximum possible level in order to be developing solutions that address problems based on what we know of what works and what we know about what doesn't work. In the GRC, for example, we have colleagues that are working also on identifying plausible future scenarios and forecasts or strategic foresights. So actually going past the traditional approach of learning from past trends, but also trying to anticipate possible future trajectories in order to, again, to be effective and to be ready and prepared. So I would like to advocate for the use of the best science, and I think this session is organized under the framework of the ocean, of the Decade for Ocean Science. I think I would like to add my voice to advocate for science-based and evidence-based approaches. And then third, in terms of effectiveness, I partially concur with what was mentioned by Dr. Rosetti, that some policies and programs might not have been as effective as we would hope. And this includes also what has been promoted by the European Commission to a certain extent. Now, in order to be more effective in the future, perhaps we could think about monitoring and evaluation frameworks, again, building on what we know already and how we can monitor and how we can harness data that we have at our disposal to be able to keep track of what's going on at different actions, at different levels, in order to also increase the, the accountability and responsibility for actions that necessarily need to be taken at all levels, starting from, let's say, grassroots, local level.
Thank you very much for this interesting contribution. Dr. Goosen, it's your turn, please. We are unmuting you. Yeah, here we go.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, thank you for the question, which is focusing very much on what should be the desirable framework. I think like the former question already addresses, it's one to have regulations and strategies in place, but it's also why is it not happening? And I think that is a good question as well, because we have a lot of directives, we have a new regulation, and actually I think it's very much to the member states and to the regions and local authorities to act upon them. And we see often, and there was this example of reporting, compulsory reporting. Europe is sometimes said, yeah, this reporting takes a lot of effort, but still you see that for example, the Water Framework Directive, the river basin management plans, the member states just had to report on their third river basin management plan, and 7 out of the 27 still have not reported on that plan. And the same is with the flood risk management plan. So what I'm saying is here, I think we have a good ideas. There's a lot of knowledge on what should be the framework, but the governance, the intergovernance cooperation, I think is a key issue. But going to the question, it's I think climate change, like Hans-Martin Fuessel already announced, I think we need to prepare for the inevitable impacts of climate change, and especially sea level rise, but also acidification, coastal storms, droughts, river floods, pluvial floods, like now in the area of Valencia, which can happen everywhere, especially in South Europe. We know it's coming, and the coastal area is exactly there where land meets the ocean. So it's a very typical area. And I think there's so much knowledge, but all local regional authorities need, and all sectors needs to have a good climate risk assessment with a long time horizon, and also making use of climate change scenarios, which at least are RCP 4.5, so that you have a good idea of what is the future climate challenges. And I think that's going to be a key element for this framework for having resilient coasts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Fiorini Beckhauser, it's your turn. Thank you.
Thank you. Trying to add something on what has been said. I think that assessing long-term sustainability involves some important aspects. Firstly, considering the health of ecosystems as a core aspect to resilience, which means trying to balance ecological integrity and human dignity, human needs within the policy framework in coastal areas, for example, by strongly protecting biodiversity, and also considering, as has been previously mentioned, what specific services and what specific products a given coastal zone affects and impacts. But also another important pillar is recognizing the interconnection, the strong interconnection between the human community and the environmental systems. That is, for coastal resilience, it's important to understand what are the complex relationships that exist between the coastal ecosystem and the human communities that inhabit that territory, to understand how and to what extent one affects the other, and vice versa. For example, to uncover what is the specific level of influence of the activities, such as marine tourism carried out by a specific community, and how it's related to the health of the ecosystem. And of course, as has been previously mentioned, as the cumulative impacts of climate change in coastal zones are often transboundary in nature, for example, if we think about sea level rise, a more holistic and also integrated approach to coastal policies would for sure benefit European coastal zones, and also institutions and government infrastructures that could be adapted to the most up-to-date scientific knowledge on climate change, in order both to increase defenses in a planned manner and also to mobilize resources, especially funding resources, for more climate resilient territories.
Thank you very much, Elisa. Dr. Rosetti, please.
Allora,
Sì, so I'm going to repeat the question for you. It's what role do you see for the public-private partnership in addressing environmental challenges for coastal resilience? Quindi il ruolo tra...
sì, sì. La risposta è facile, it's easy. I don't know.
The answer is easy. I don't know.
La concertazione pubblico-privato, noi ci occorre un nuovo patto sociale che coinvolga tutti i vari soggetti dal mondo produttivo, economico, sociale della nostra realtà, delle nostre città, del nostro paese. Come farlo? Non ne ho la minima idea.
I know that we need a new pact, a new agreement between all the stakeholders of our society, private, public, local government. How to do that? I don't know.
E provo a spiegarlo perché altrimenti...
I'm trying to explain it.
Quando si parla di ambiente, quando si parla di clima, quando si parla di raccolta rifiuti, quando si parla dei cambiamenti della nostra società,
when we talk about environment, climate, waste, and changing of our societies,
ci troviamo in una situazione paradossale, perché sono diventati argomenti, tra virgolette, di consenso politico.
We found ourselves in a paradox because these subjects became political items.
E quindi si esce al di fuori da ogni logica, tra virgolette, tecnica, scientifica, di merito, e ci si confronta con un'opinione che tendenzialmente è quella che il nostro interlocutore ritiene che porti il consenso, e questo capita molto spesso.
So we move out of the technical, scientific, or the merit of the questions, and we are just gonna identify opinions that are what bring consensus, political consensus.
Siamo soggetti alla valutazione di Facebook rispetto alle scelte tecnico-scientifiche che dobbiamo applicare.
And sometimes, like how many likes you get on a social media, like Facebook, then becomes the policy that we want to apply because we get political consensus.
E quindi argomenti che dovrebbero essere di natura prettamente tecnico-scientifica, di confronto di merito, di valutazione di ipotesi, di studio, di ricerca, a volte anche di esperimenti, sono costantemente mediati dai nostri interlocutori rispetto a quello che è la percezione che quello schieramento politico, o in quel momento, perché poi cambiano, non sono, ritiene di poter portare avanti. Scelte infrastrutturali fondamentali per i nostri territori, per esempio una diga, oggi sono quasi irrealizzabili. Io sono di Forlì, noi abbiamo una diga importante alle nostre spalle. Quando è stata costruita ci sono stati decenni di cause, però in quel momento la politica stava nel gioco delle parti, ha fatto il suo lavoro, ha tirato avanti.
Okay, so what he's saying that all these decisions are actually, they should be technical, scientific, they should be made doing research, running hypotheses, doing experiments. But they can't be done, be taken in this way because they are influenced by the political party of the moment and its vision. For example, actually it didn't say social media, but anyway, so the infrastructure, very important infrastructure decision like building a dam cannot really be done, because of this necessity of the political parties to obtain support.
Cosa
and
che...
he was talking about the dam that was built in Forlì, in Ridracoli, 45 years ago. It took a long time, he will say.
Ma con centinaia di cause.
That dam that was built about 40 years ago took long time to be built, and it had hundreds of suing by different institutions and authorities.
Oggi nessun sindaco riuscirebbe a portare a termine quell'opera che ha risolto il problema dell'acqua in Romagna.
So today, no mayor will be able to make a decision that was possible 40 years ago. Because of these reasons, because all the associations and the institutions that will fight against you legally.
E per il mondo produttivo, adesso parlo di chi in qualche modo mi trovo qui un po' a rappresentare, quando qualcuno gli dice che il problema non esiste, quando qualcuno sostiene che quelle risorse sono inutili, che quello sforzo può essere concentrato da un'altra parte, può trovare un terreno fertile, perché di problemi ce ne sono già tanti da affrontare tutti i giorni.
Yes, and talking from a private sector, when somebody says that a problem does not exist, it can be taken as an opportunity not to think about the problem, because there are already so many other issues that you need to take care of.
Però non abbiamo alternative, dobbiamo capire come trovare una soluzione per declinare, perché quello che dicevamo anche all'inizio, nessuno da solo, neanche il pubblico ce la può fare.
We have no alternative, so we have to find a way to cooperate together, because nobody alone is able to achieve anything on these matters. No, è che
E dico solo ancora due cose, perché poi sempre, scusatemi questa vena di pessimismo, ma
I'm sorry, I apologize for my slightly pessimistic feel.
quando la professoressa Baroncelli ci parlava appunto di governance del sistema delle coste,
When Professor Baroncelli talked to us about governance of costs,
in questo momento la governance globale ci sta portando ad avere più conflitti armati dentro l'Europa e in buona parte del mondo, dove qualunque persona di buon senso ritiene che sia una follia.
esatto. I'm giving my opinion before translating. I mean, of course, I'm gonna go. Like, what are the international governance is leading us at the moment is towards conflicts internally in Europe and outside Europe, where everybody of common sense would agree that's not the right choice.
E dall'altro lato, quando anche diceva the cost,
When Professor Baroncelli was saying that the costs,
quindi che la costa costa, ma è assolutamente vero. Questa regione, che io ritengo che sia una regione assolutamente virtuosa,
what she says it's absolutely true. What I can say about this region, which is a positive, one of the best region, virtuosa non mi viene,
destina il 95% del proprio bilancio alla sanità.
This region allocates 95% of its funds to health.
E ognuno di noi dice che ci vorrebbe uno sforzo ancora maggiore.
And we all say that we need more, we need more funds for the public health.
In qualche modo il sistema paese riesce a trovare risorse per situazioni di emergenza, non riusciamo a trovare le risorse per gestire un sistema di manutenzione del territorio efficace, perché è un costo ripetitivo ed è un costo che, quando non succede l'evento, assolutamente impopolare.
Okay, so somehow we found resources to face emergencies. I'm thinking about COVID, as I think you were thinking about that. Not only, yes, but we found the resources to face an emergency, but then we don't find the resources to be steadily allocated to face a problem.
Perché in questo caso bisogna intervenire sulla fiscalità.
Because the only way to be able to do so is to talk about taxes.
Cosa che è assolutamente impopolare e tendenzialmente porta a perdere le elezioni.
Which is something that no political party wants to do, because it leads you to lose the next
Quindi
election.
la nostra sfida è come portare fuori dal terreno del consenso alcuni argomenti: l'ambiente, il cambiamento climatico, con tutte le sfaccettature, perché intanto che rimane legato a un aspetto che è la gestione del consenso, noi saremo perdenti.
So our challenge is to take these very important themes like environment and climate change outside the boundaries of consensus by the political parties.
Questo mi sono trovato a dire anche in qualche commissione parlamentare, mi hanno dato tutti ragione.
He said that he said the same thing in some European commission, like not European, Italian parliamentary commission, subcommission, and he got like everybody say, "Oh, you're right, you're absolutely right." Grazie.
Thank you very much for your point of view. So time runs so fast. I have to ask Professor Baroncelli to close this session and to merge all these interesting topics that are on the floor. So please.
Thank you very much. I think I have more questions than answers, but let me start with, we have a problem of compliance, with respect to the private sector companies. What is necessary for private companies to comply, and what is necessary to induce political leaders to adopt environmentally beneficial measures? Cosa ci vuole per spingere le imprese a adeguarsi e che cosa ci vuole per spingere la politica a rispondere? In realtà non sono due domande diverse. They really are not two different questions. They are different sides of the same problem, the problem of compliance. There was a similar problem in the reduction of GHG, un problema simile nella riduzione delle emissioni di gas, di carbon dioxide. Come è stato risolto? How was that problem resolved? Con l'accordo di Parigi, un sistema misto, ibrido, a mixed system, a hybrid system, un pochino top down, quindi un pochino di targets set by at the international level, e un pochino di bottom up, a little bit of top down objectives, a little bit of bottom up endeavors, the nationally determined contributions. Obiettivi nazionali, ciascuno Stato fissa il livello oltre il quale non vuole andare o non può andare. È un sistema misto, it's a mixed system, it's not perfect, but at least it keeps states on their toes, li tiene in riga perché fissano dei livelli e quindi devono poi starci a quei livelli, se no ci fanno brutta figura con gli altri. Okay? So this system of self-set compliance targets that keeps states alert on their toes, and the inducement comes from horizontal peer pressure. Quindi l'induzione alla compliance arriva da una pressione orizzontale, cioè se gli altri fanno meglio di me, allora lo posso fare anch'io. Avevo detto un anno fa che ci arrivavo, non ci sono arrivato perché I set that objective for myself a year ago, I didn't comply. This naming and shaming, questa sorta di ci sei riuscito, non ci sei riuscito, oppure sanzioni positive, sanzioni negative. È chiaro che non sono nulla di quello che ci vorrebbe, però è un modo. It's a way. It's not exactly what we need, but it's a way. But two points. One point, a question. What would a private company need as an inducement to comply? Di cosa avrebbe bisogno un'azienda privata per dire, oh bene, faccio un mucchio di queste cose qui e adesso le faccio anche meglio. Prima non le chiamavo in quel modo, ma adesso che so che si possono chiamare in quel modo, ci metto di più del mio e le faccio ancora meglio. Che cosa serve? Perché se abbiamo un'Unione Europea che ci mette del suo, se abbiamo un'istituzione internazionale come EUCRA, UNESCO che ci mette del suo, può darsi che il dialogo si avvii. So what is needed for private companies to be compliant? E un ultimo punto, my last point, you closed about conflict and international governance leading to conflict. Let me respectfully disagree. It's states who make wars. It's not the UN. So that's a point. Taking coastal resilience out of consensus politics, togliere fuori il tema della resilienza costiera dalla politica del consenso. I understand what you mean. I understand what you mean when you advocate for a role of science and science-based policy. But at the same time, we need to build consensus. We need to have citizens behind us. We need to have them supporting. We need to have a voice that speaks in favor of these measures. Abbiamo bisogno in realtà che i cittadini ci sostengano, perché se strappiamo fuori questa cosa dall'arena del consenso, dalla lotta, diciamo, di fazioni partitiche e la teniamo nel regno della tecnocrazia, e non ne usciamo, la dobbiamo rendere politically palatable. We have to make coastal politics politically palatable. That is a challenge. So I think this has been an exceptional occasion to gather around the same table European Union officers, private sector officers, experts, scientists, and I'm very, very thankful for this wonderful opportunity to speak about the coast. Let me thank you once again and also bring the word for a very final word to Professor Pinardi.
So thank you very much also the people listening from far away and participating. Thank all the present people. It was very inspiring, I have to say. We touched on so many fundamental issues, which makes us even more looking forward more opportunities for these discussions. We need to have them and have more people, but in general, we need to get that complexity of representativeness of the society around the table. And let me conclude with my preferred phrase by Abraham Lincoln that talks about empathy. So empathy, he says, can solve all the problems that we have. And so I hope we will find empathy in our society for the problem of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the contribution. See you tomorrow at 10 for the next chapter. That is the science in support for coastal resilience. Good afternoon.